All right. So first, I just want to welcome everyone to what I know is going to be an incredibly informative webinar. We are recording this, so we will be able to share it with everyone after the fact. So if there's anyone in the organization that ultimately could benefit from what you learned today, feel free, once the link is out after this webinar, to share it to anyone that you want. And I'm sure we're all going to share it to our YouTube channels, which I'll explain in just a minute. But ultimately, this webinar is from risk to resilience, and it's mastering cybersecurity insurance coverage. I'm going to talk a little bit in a minute about what that really means and why, but it's all about the blocking and tackling of businesses these days. You have an MSP, and we provide various services, but we also have to prepare for the what ifs of the world. And Alex and Spencer are really going to help us with that. So ultimately, I want to introduce, well, actually, let me do the housekeeping first. So everyone is muted on this, but if you have a question, and all of us are interactive speakers, so we just love to get questions from the audience, and we highly encourage it. This is your opportunity to speak with two incredibly brilliant people in their industries to be able to get the answers that may have been bugging you or just occurred to you on this webinar. But how you do that is just move your mouse down to the bottom of the screen, and you're going to see a Q&A button. Just click on that, enter in your question, and I'll make sure, or Mallory will make sure, who's on the webinar in the background, that we bring that question to the forefront and you get the answers, because that's what this is actually all about. It's about information and it's about education. And that's our only goal on this webinar, is to really try and inform the business community in the United States that these are the things you need to be prepared for, you need to be thinking about at a minimum, you just need to be informed on. So again, mastering cybersecurity insurance coverage, that's what this is about. So this webinar has been put on by, there's a bunch of us out there, from the Infinities to the Metros, to the LNSs, to the Darts, to the Sundogs, a bunch of us companies, you can see some of us at the bottom there, including PTG, that we've formed a relationship with each other because we realize cybersecurity and delivering service and IT service these days, it's very difficult to do it on your own. So we've all come together to be able to share best practices, share teams, share information that we have in order to provide the highest level of service that we can to our clients, as well as make sure that we can protect our clients from what is becoming an incredible threat to our economy. And that is all those bad actors that are out there that figured out how to create a multi-billion-dollar world, right? And they are aggressively coming at all of us. So together is how we're stronger. And I'm really excited to, one, be hosting this webinar on behalf of all of the geographies that are participating in it. But I guess without further ado, I think we should kick it off and let's get right to the meat of this thing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce Alex really quick. And Alex, if you could give me a 60-second commercial of who you are, your firm, and then we'll kick into Spencer, and then we'll get right to this webinar.
Happy to. And can you hear me okay, Cohen?
I sure can.
Okay, great. So good morning, everybody. I have to say I'm super impressed to have this many attendees join a webinar that's going to be about cyber and insurance. And I say that, somewhat sheepishly, right? Nobody really loves insurance. However, cyber risk in general and the aspect and role that insurance plays in it, I think is scary for a lot of people. So when Cohen talks about the Q&A button, in the most genuine sense, I mean it, there are no stupid questions. As much as Spencer and I are going to be chatting away on this call, right, this is actually not for us. This is not just to hear ourselves talk. This is for you. So I promise you, if there's a burning question you have, somebody else probably has something similar, and you're doing everyone a favor by asking it. We will make sure that they get asked, and it can be anonymous. So please don't be shy. So I'm Alexandra. I'm with Johnson, Kendall & Johnson. So I'm an insurance broker. I'm a little unique for the insurance world. My background was actually in IT consulting. So I started my career at Ernst & Young in their IT advisory practice. I then went on and did some telecom consulting. And then I joined this deep, dark thing called the insurance world about 8.5 years ago. I founded and lead our cyber practice at JKJ. So I'm focused heavily on making sure organizations just like yourself are more comfortable in getting their arms around how to manage cyber risk and what role insurance has in that. So we're going to talk about that today. So I'm involved in everything from the preventative strategies to the placement of insurance to being involved if and when an incident happens. And our
Awesome.
brokerage is just we're based up in the Philadelphia area, but we've got clients in 46 states and internationally. So no geographic bounds.
Appreciate it, Alex. How about you, Spencer?
Yeah, Cohen, thank you so much for the introduction and good morning, everybody. I'll piggyback on what Alex said, we appreciate everybody taking their time to come this morning. It's not the most exciting topic at times. We do find it exciting. I think we're all cyber and privacy nerds and tech nerds on here, but we do appreciate everyone coming. As Cohen said, my name is Spencer Pollock. I'm a privacy, data protection, cybersecurity attorney with McDonald Hopkins. I'm a partner at the firm and a member of the data protection privacy group. My group kind of does both sides, a holistic approach to these issues. We do a lot of the privacy consulting and privacy compliance on the front end. So if you're thinking about basically MSAs, contracts, incident response planning, incident tabletops, vendor due diligence, CCPA compliance, that's the California Consumer Protection Act, privacy compliance, privacy policies, anything under the privacy consulting world we do. We also are heavy in the incident response world. My group's done about 12,000 incidents. Myself, I've done about 700. So we're talking about ransomware, business email compromise, cyber extortion, anything under the cyber sun. We do it. We kind of call ourselves breach counsel or breach coaches because we're the ones who come in after you notify your insurance broker, or if you don't have insurance, if you call us first, because then we kind of rally the troops, bring in the appropriate parties to help solve the issues at hand. And yeah, I appreciate everyone being here. Looking forward to a good discussion.
Awesome. Thanks, Spencer. So, and I'm sure Spencer and Alex would agree with me. We hear it all the time about I'm too small. It's not going to happen to me. Million excuses out there of why this topic may not be pertinent. But the fact that we have got so many people on this webinar today, I think it's starting to become more of a reality and realize we have two industry experts in the legal and the insurance industry that this is what they do because it is real, right? This does happen. And it happens to all of us, the small business owners of a 10-person firm, 100, 250, 500, you name it. It's not just the Targets of the world. It's not just the LinkedIns of the world. It's all of us that this is affected by. And I thought I'd kind of set the stage really quick and talk about a particular incident that we have seen. And we saw this with one of our clients, full disclosure, right? The moral of this story is going to be nothing is 100% out there. We, and just like all the other companies that sponsored this webinar, have a real passion for making sure that we provide a high level of IT service, but we provide a high level of IT security. Many of us, it's core to who we are as individuals. It's core to who our teams are. And we do everything we can to make sure that we can prevent any incident that's out there. But again, nothing when it comes down to it is 100% because this is a billion-dollar industry. These bad actors out there make a lot of money in the process of doing this. So when that happens, when there is that financial incentive, ultimately what you get is you get innovation, right? You get creativity. And in their world with the black hats, it's not helpful to all of us. So what occurs is we create something to stop it and a new threat emerges. So let me get to it really quick because I know we got a lot to cover. So imagine you've got an email account and you've got two-factor authentication on it. So this is real world that I'm telling you about. And this email account actually got compromised. And it was someone that was in charge of projects for an organization. Now you could say, how could anyone compromise email because they don't, or compromise two-factor authentication because they don't have my phone? We're not going to get into that here, but there's a thing called 2FA fatigue and man in the middle. I'd highly recommend you Google. But at this point, we have now realized two-factor authentication is not 100% either. So imagine this company, this person, right? We'll just call it the office manager. Email got compromised. Bad actor got in there, looked through all the emails, all the sent items, all that, and actually got to spend time with that particular person's email account and got to know their client base and got to know a little bit about that organization. And it was intriguing to them because they did large projects. Now, this is a 30-person company, right? They did large projects because there's a lot of product involved. And then imagine that hacker realizes, hey, they have a big project going on right now. And hey, there's some timelines that are happening that, especially financial, progress payments on a particular project. So what the hacker did was create a message rule that anytime that client emailed the office manager, it redirected that email down to a subfolder, right? Hacker would go there every day and look. And if it was something like, hey, how's your day? They would move that email back up to the inbox and mark it as unread. Office manager had no idea whatsoever. So the hacker started realizing progress payments coming up. So what they did is they emailed the client and said, hey, for progress payments going forward, we actually changed banks recently. Here's our new account number and routing number. The beauty about this attack, let's call it, was they didn't ask for money. So the client's guard dropped. Oh, it's just a status update on where I need to wire the money. Then the hacker went through and started looking at, okay, what is the next progress payment from this particular client? All right, have that information. What are some example invoices that are out there? Really easy in Adobe Photoshop or a free version of Photoshop, created an invoice that looks just like what that particular client is used to seeing. And then a day before they usually got that progress payment invoice, the hacker sent out an invoice for X amount of dollars. Now remember, the client has updated their routing number and their bank account number for making payments to this company. And the client paid $118,000 to the hacker. That money's gone at that point. So it was something as simple, and we call this in the industry now, it's actually getting a turn. It's called business email compromise. You're going to hear about this more and more. It's going to start making the news. It's going to be on your insurance questionnaires, those kind of things. But here is a small organization, right, that the office manager's email got compromised. And rather than everyone's worried about what happens to me, right? Is someone actually going to attack me? No, they went after their clients. So that's how this landscape is continuously changing, because they're getting more and more creative. If they can't get money out of you, they're going to look to your client base and figure out how we can actually get money out of them. And these are what we're seeing on a regular basis, which is exactly why Alex's industry is there, which is exactly why Spencer is here, and the roles that they perform post-incident are an absolute reality. So it's incredibly important. And I know many of our clients across all the companies that sponsored this, you all are on the call. And we're doing everything we can, and we do a phenomenal job protecting you. But again, nothing's 100%. And when that's the case, what blocking and tackling do you all need? And that's the point of this webinar, right? What blocking and tackling do you need to make sure that not only you protected on the front end, the prevention piece, but what happens if that event actually takes place? And what do you need to make sure that you've got your ducks in a row to be able to protect your organization, your clients, and your employees going forward? So without further ado, I thought this would be a nice transition to you, Alex, to talk about the insurance world, what's out there, and how do you fit into this cybersecurity landscape that I think I set the stage for.
Yeah, thank you, Cohen. Just to touch on a few things you talked about in that anecdote. So number one, more often than not, the incidents that we experience are not IT related issues. They are people related issues. Somebody did something they likely should not have done. It's not always the case, but more often than not, that's the unfortunate reality here. When you think about the type of incident you just described, the email compromise, let's play through then what types of costs that's going to result in for this business. Number one, it's that lost payment, because they still owe whoever they were legitimately supposed to pay for that project that money, because it was never received. So you've lost it over here and you still owe it over there. Number two, now that we've confirmed that somebody has compromised an email, we have to do an investigation. So we would need to hire somebody like a Spencer, who's going to oversee that from a legal standpoint and provide attorney-client privilege. And we're going to need to engage a forensics firm in order to really go, okay, what happened, how it happened, stop the bleeding. Let's see how many individuals have their emails compromised. Yes, it was Sally, Joe, and project management, but it also could be Jim, Bob, and accounting. And we'd have to go through a thorough investigation. Once you figure out how many individuals' emails are compromised, you then need to figure out what information was in those emails. And again, this is where Spencer would come in. So you have a firm that's doing data analytics to go, okay, is there any sensitive information in here? personally identifiable information, personal health information, other proprietary sensitive information that you may have an obligation to protect. And then who do we have to notify? In accordance with various laws, in accordance with your contracts that you've signed with other organizations. Unfortunately, the devil's very much in the details, right? We sign contracts all the time, not necessarily being privy to what we're agreeing to. You might have agreed to notify somebody within 24 hours if you've had a cyber incident. And that's just what you've agreed to by contract, and we need to comply with that. So there's a host of things that happen. Now, let's take a step back here. One of my goals for today, and given my background, I like to say I speak 3 languages. I speak insurance nerd, I speak tech nerd, and I speak business. All right. And my goal is to translate all 3 for you and really demystify not only cyber risk, but the role of insurance in that. So, Cohen, would you mind bringing up
Alex,
the slide?
let's do what should we do a poll real quick to see?
Yeah.
I'd love to know who actually has cyber insurance on the call. So Mallory, if you could post that poll, and I'm encouraging every one of you to answer this. I would love to know if you've actually got it, and be brutally honest, because that helps us really understand if we need to lean in even further on education on this and how important it is. So, oh, they're rolling in, and it looks like it's overwhelming. Well, I shouldn't say overwhelming. There's a lot of those out
So I
there.
can't see the results. I can just
Yeah,
see
I can't see the results either.
Yeah, so we're going to end the poll here in just a second. I'll show you, but right now 61% say yes, 38% say no, which is a significant amount of entrants that do not have it. So go ahead, Alex.
So if you don't mind, pull up the slides here. I want to talk
Yep.
first about the risk, the role of insurance. And then I'm going to give you just a 1 slide, and you'll get access to these on really what does the insurance cover at a high layman's terms. So, okay, now I'm able to see the results that the poll has ended. Yep, 63 and 38%. I'm sure there's a mix of folks in there who weren't sure and picked one or the other as well. So high level, let's talk cyber risk management. This is something you're all capable of understanding without being technology specialists. So number 1, it's a balance of security, cost, and convenience. So a couple of years ago, we as a community of organizations felt it was sufficiently secure to have a complex password, right? So we all had to remember our complex password, and that's what was required to get into a system. It really didn't cost us any money because most systems were already equipped with the ability to accept complex passwords, and it's mildly inconvenient, right? The more passwords we've added, it's become more inconvenient, but okay, a minor inconvenience there. Well, that dynamic has continued to shift. As Cohen talked about, we've got now multi-factor authentication or 2-factor authentication. This is considered more secure. It may even cost a little bit of money to deploy if your system was not pre-fitted to allow for that. And it's a little bit more inconvenient. So it's a constant balancing act of figuring out, okay, what is reasonably secure at a cost my organization can afford and without interrupting our operations to an inordinate degree, right? That's the balancing act we're all playing. And that's going to look a little different for every organization, but there's some commonalities that should apply to most across the board. The second balancing act, and I alluded to this already, is really people, process, and technology. Too often when we talk about cyber risk, we're thinking about it in the context of technology. I don't know what that means. I just need to buy more firewalls, I think, right? Like that's kind of that default. I don't understand this. It must be a technology piece. But far more often, where we see the lapse is on the people and process sides of those triangles. And I'll give you a really good example. It's considered an old one now, but it's tale as old as time. Cohen mentioned the Target breach, and I like to use that one because it dominated the news back in 2014 when this happened. And became really a name brand incident. Target has all the technology in the world. And for that incident that Target had, their technology piece of their triangle did not fail. What failed was people and process. They had an intrusion detection system that detected there was an intruder in their system. Technology did what it was supposed to do. Nobody acted on the alert. Nobody monitored the alert. We failed on the people and process side. So it's not just technology focused. So these are things that you as leaders in your organizations and in roles that are outside of just managing the IT have a play in terms of developing really sound processes. Then there's insurance. Because to Cohen's point, we don't just sit here and accrue money for the day that we might have to pay a ransom or accrue money for the day that we may inadvertently pay somebody that we were not supposed to pay. Those are incidental and accidental occurrences. And so we buy insurance that is going to cover all the costs we described: the legal, the forensics, the data analytics, and the loss payment. Those are the types of things we want insurance to help us in getting through and navigating those incidents. Now, I love the name of this webinar because it was from risk to resilience, because there is actually no such thing as going to bed at night and going, yes, we did it, we're cyber secure. That is the unfortunate reality. There's no compliance framework you can follow. That absolute certainty is provided where you are cyber secure. However, there is a very real goal of being cyber resilient. It's to say we can sustain an attack and recover from it. And so in the bottom right corner, you see that little screen grab that's from the NIST cybersecurity framework. So it's be able to identify, protect yourself, detect an attack, respond to it, and recover. That's that concept of resilience here, and the big focus. And what insurance is designed to help you do is to be resilient. And then, of course, there's the reasonableness standard. So when I talk about those balancing acts of security, cost, convenience, people, process, and technology, the question becomes, what is reasonable to expect for an organization of my size and my industry? So if you looked at your direct competitor that's most similarly sized to you doing the same thing, and you gave them your personal information, how would you expect them to safeguard it? Would you expect they have multi-factor authentication? Would you expect that they've ever done a penetration test? Would you expect that they have done employee training to try to educate their employees around the risks of cyber and how to prevent an attack from happening? That's that moving target and the standard you're going to be held to in a court of law. Now let's go on to this next slide here, and I'll just breeze through what insurance is exactly designed to do. Okay, so a lot on this page here. I'm going to navigate you through it. Let's look first at the top right. Cyber insurance is both a first and a third party coverage. So think about a car accident. Your auto insurance, your personal auto insurance, has both first and third party components. If you get into a car accident, it's covering damages to your vehicle, to your bodily injury. And if you cause it to somebody else, you're now covering their vehicle damages, their bodily injury. It has that first and third lever to it. So does cyber insurance. It's going to give you both. It offers both financial risk transfer, which is really what insurance is, right? You pay a premium in order to transfer your risk. So it gives you financial risk transfer. But one of the beautiful things, and I know I'm a insurance nerd here, but what I really love about cyber insurance is it's like calling Ghostbusters. Who are you going to call at time of incident? Who's going to help me through this? It's cyber insurance. They have a pre-approved panel of providers, which really just is a fancy way of saying a list that they've vetted out of folks like a Spencer that they know and trust to navigate you through an incident. So now let's talk about the four buckets here that I like to say are really covered by cyber insurance. So bucket number one, like I said, is that incident response. So what that's going to include is IT forensics, again, to triage the incident, what happened, how it happened, stop the bleeding. You're going to need legal. You may or may not need public relations if you end up in the news as a result of an incident. And then if a breach is determined to have occurred, you might have to go through the notification costs in accordance with state laws, setting up a call center, doing mailings, offering credit monitoring, et cetera, et cetera. And depending on the nature of the incident, you may have some issues getting your IT systems back up and running. So you may incur restoration costs. All of that is part of incident response, and all of that is intended to be covered by a real cyber insurance policy. And when I say real, if anyone on this call says to me, I think I have a little bit and it's part of my general liability policy, I can tell you without looking at it, it's not worth the paper it's written on. You need a dedicated, actual cyber insurance policy to ensure that the things I'm talking about today are actually incorporated. Bucket number two. This falls into legal and regulatory. So the cost of legal, so having a Spencer or somebody like that at your side and guiding you through the incident, but also there's the chance that you'll now face litigation from those individuals whose information you may have compromised, whether it's proprietary or private information. Regulatory fines, so depending on the nature of the industry that you're working in, healthcare, HIPAA could do an investigation. If you're in New York, the New York Department of Financial Services, GDPR, if you're dealing with international data, CCPA, if you're dealing with California data, any regulatory body that may investigate you, you're going to need defense. And then there's a possibility that they may assign a fine or penalty. Those are intended to be insured by this policy. Cybercrime. One of the things that's really dominated the news over the last few years is these ransomware attacks. The Colonial Pipeline being one of the great examples that really us as lay people, not even just in the cyber world, everyone became privy to. What can happen if they captivate your system and hold it for ransom? And one of the quotes I love is about the idea that, and it goes back to your point, Cohen, well, I'm a small organization. Why do they care about me? It's not always that they do care about you. And in fact, more often than not, they don't. What they are exploiting is that you care about you. You care about being able to operate. You care about your data. So that is what they're exploiting. It's not so much the value of the data itself, right? We've all gotten the letter in the mail that says, hey, your information may or may not have been breached. Here's free credit monitoring. The uptake on that is actually particularly low. But the reality is you care about being able to resume operating, and that's what they extort. So extortion is a part of the coverage, actually payment of a ransom. What Cohen described was both a social engineering attack and an email compromise. So social engineering would be the idea that you voluntarily part with money. You parted with it to somebody who's not who they said they were. I thought I was paying my normal vendor, but in fact, I paid the bad guy over here who was pretending to be them. But that's intended to be covered here as well. And then all of this in our last bucket can have an impact on your business. If your IT systems are down, whether in part or in total, what does that look like to your business? And that's something we really want to think about. At what point do you start losing money? At what point do you start losing customers or clients? Can I go 2-3 days and not lose anybody? Can I go 2-3 weeks and not lose anybody? The average impact of a ransomware attack is typically around 3 weeks. So what financial impact does that have on your organization and your revenue generation? And just like on property insurance, where we have business interruption or business income loss, the same thing exists on cyber. So it's your income loss as a result of a cyber incident. And if you're buying it on property, you're not getting it necessarily for a cyber attack. Property is meant to cover a property incident. If you didn't have a flood, a hail storm, or fire in your building, your business income on your property policy is not responding. You need a cyber policy that's intended to cover a cyber incident. And I'm going to pause there. I know I just spoke a lot, and I'm sure, Spencer, you have some thoughts to add as well.
Well, real quick, sorry, Spencer, before we get to you, yeah, what you just mentioned there, Alex, is incredibly important because I know we have manufacturers on this call. And can you imagine a ransomware attack happens and your line shut down? You're not able to produce the widgets that you have. So sometimes we forget about how dependent we are on technology in the actual production of materials. And that means revenue loss right there. But it also applies to the law firm. If your people aren't able to get into the system and bill their hours and send out invoicing, that's significant revenue loss. So it's not only the reputation and all those things, but as you mentioned, Alex, that revenue loss piece can be incredibly impactful to your organization. And that's why having the correct insurance coverage is important. Hey, I want to do one more poll, Spencer, before we get going with you. Mm-hmm. Basically, Mallory, if you could put up the one, I'm curious, while Spencer's talking, what cyber threats people are actually worried about out there. So if we can get that poll going, that would be great. We'll release the results at the end. And I've got a question that's come in, but I'm going to save that for the Q&A at the end. So sorry, Spencer, go ahead and take it from there.
That's okay. Yeah, I mean, so from my perspective, one, cyber insurance provides you a lot of protection. You know, this is not cheap. So I think an average data breach globally costs about $4.2 million. And you think, I could imagine companies, you know, small, large, medium, probably saying, well, you know, those are more like the mega size. The problem is it's really not because of everything Alex highlighted. And it really goes beyond that initial burst, right? So what the cyber insurance is going to give you, gives you a lot of financial protection, but it also gets you to the right people. There's legitimately about 8 firms out there that do incident response work. There's a lot of attorneys who say they do it. There's a lot of incident response firms that say they do it, but they don't. And the problem when you don't have insurance is your initial reaction is to call your general attorney, which is a problem. You know, because unfortunately, this is a really specialized area. And you really need to be cognizant of bringing those right parties in to start. So the insurance, as Alex was explaining, it gets you to the right people, and you have to move quickly with it. You also get preferred rates, right? Because if you look at my standard rate versus an insurance rate that's been Negotiated, it's starkly different. And that's the same thing on the incident response side. That's the same thing on if you have to do notifications or data mining or litigation as well. And I think the big part too, just stepping back as well, I think business email compromise is a underestimated problem that we're seeing in our society right now, because as Alex and Cohen were saying, a lot of the information that we're taking in over email is sensitive, right? It's financial information, it's maybe socials, it's maybe driver's lists, maybe medical information. And we don't have great email retention policies. So think about if you just go look into your sent mailbox right now or your deleted mailbox, how many do you have? And then imagine if all of those were potentially acquired or accessed, and then you had to go through all of them and then go notify every person in there. And threat actors, while they're not targeting usually personal information, the law doesn't distinguish between that. They really just care about if it was acquired or if it was accessed. The other big part, what we're seeing right now is a huge uptick of class action lawsuits. So before, if you had under 100,000 people impacted, we weren't really seeing class action lawsuits. Class action lawsuits come from this after notifications go out. The allegations are usually negligence, unfair and deceptive trade practices in terms of what you were doing and what you were saying you were doing, violation of implied contracts, and then violation of the data breach notification laws. So once again, about a year, 2 years ago, if you had under 100,000 people, we weren't really concerned about it. Now we're seeing class action lawsuits between 5 and 10,000 people impacted. So it's really not that many, right? If you just look at your business and about how much information you took in over the course of your lifetime as a business, meaning past and current employees and clients, that could generate your number for a lawsuit. And without insurance, that creates a huge liability, right? Because we're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars for settlements and defense costs, in the millions for those things. So I think having that too for the insurance is a huge aspect moving forward. And yeah, I think we can go to the poll.
And Spencer, just to round out that thought, they're talking about the class action litigation that's come out post data breach. That's that third party liability piece of the policy. That if there's now a class that's suing you saying you didn't handle my data properly, you may owe them due course, which is going to come out of that third party piece of the insurance, which is really in that bucket number 2, what's on the screen there, lawsuits and privacy regulatory investigation.
Hey, Spencer, one thing, like you mentioned that whole your sent items, right? And your deleted items. I mean, I'm sure I'm no different than a lot. I've got an incredible amount of historical data on there. A question that came up is, so if someone compromised my email and they sent out, let's say, a malicious piece of software to everyone I've ever sent an email to, and let's say that email went to, could be a small organization, could be a large organization, and that led to a compromise for that particular organization. I assume that there's litigation out there on who is ultimately responsible for something like that leads to additional litigation, which is a concern for even a small company. And I guess, Alex, also that applies to you, that making sure you have adequate insurance coverage for something like that as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think a big thing, it's a good point, right? Because it's like the phishing attack or compromise of your email that leads to another business. The business is instantly going to turn around and blame you. Now, the argument back is, well, you should have been more mindful and had better policies internally. Most laws, especially like wire fraud, right? From Cohen's example, if a threat actor sends me a new email and it's fraudulent and I don't confirm the wire instructions and I do it, it's going to fall on me. But the problem is I'm still going to turn around and blame you and say you were negligent in your infrastructure, your policy procedures. And the last thing you want is to get into that fight. And the biggest problem is the people you're about to get into a fight with are your customers, right? Or your clients or your partners or your vendors. And those are relationships that are not adverse. So then you're put in a really tough position. So there's a lot of liability that comes, and there's a lot of reputational and business
Absolutely.
perspective that you have to look at with that.
I even personally remember when previous insurance company that we did business with, the rep was compromised and it was an infected attachment that got sent out. And I'm sitting there thinking, really, you're protecting my business from an insurance perspective, and you can't even protect your own. And now you potentially could have caused harm to mine. And it does enter your head, and that's something we all want to avoid.
Well, this comes back to the idea of the car accident, right? This is why it's so
Yeah.
important for all organizations to have cyber insurance, because you don't want to fight that fight. You don't want to decide who's fully liable. You want to just get your business back up and running if you're
Yep.
impacted and recovered, and get the situation resolved, whether it was an email compromise or otherwise, and let your insurance carrier deal with the other insurance carrier for who's responsible, called subrogation, right? Same way with the car accident. You report it to your auto carrier, let them report it to theirs, and they hash it out. You're not assuming any fault or liability.
Yep.
Alex,
All
can
right,
you talk about
go ahead.
wire fraud coverage? Because I feel like a big thing that comes across my desk, at least, is clients with insufficient wire fraud coverage, where they're kind of left, they thought they had it, but it wasn't there. So I'd love if you could touch on the importance of that.
Yeah, this is one of the challenges with the insurance world. So it's a tricky field. So the cyber policies are certainly not all created equal. There's no such thing as a standard cyber form. So the devil is again in the details and how these policies are written. Some are calling it funds transfer fraud. And what they mean by that might be actually what we call computer fraud. Somebody hacks in and actually steals the money from you. That's different than you voluntarily parting with it. Those are different coverages. Then there might be a provision in the policy that says, hey, we're giving you that social engineering you part with it coverage, but only if you follow a callback provision, meaning you make a phone call and verify a change in a transaction or the authenticity of the transaction before you do it. And if you fail to do that, there is no coverage in place. On top of that, again, one of the frustrations with the insurance world is sometimes the coverages and aspects of a policy we want or need the most are not what's actually being provided. So when you talk about these crime coverages around social engineering in particular, not extortion, but really just these financial, I'm transferring the money out. It's really hard to get high limits on that. So you're typically not getting a full policy limit. So what I mean by that is if you're buying $1 million cyber policy, you're probably getting somewhere between 100 and 500,000 of coverage for those incidents. They won't provide you with a full policy limit. So there's limitations. But this comes back to that people, process, and technology triangle. Typically, the real failure where you have social engineering fraud is in people and process. Because even if somebody's in someone's email, and so the email itself is legitimately coming from that sender, they didn't know it, but somebody's in my email and sending emails as Alexandra, there's still a duty of care on the receiving end to actually validate something before you act upon it. And that comes back to this idea of education probably being the most important thing you can do. Yep. Is making sure folks have a level of skepticism and that every individual in the organization understands that cybersecurity is part of their job. It is not an IT problem.
Absolutely. The trainings that we do for our clients consistently revolve around that human interaction piece. Anything financially related, there should be some checks and balances within there, because you don't know if the employee or the vendor or whoever that's sending you the email, it may be straight up legit coming from their email account, but it still may not be them that is actually initiating that particular email. We have a bunch of questions coming in, and there's a few that are revolving around cybersecurity insurance questionnaires. I'm gonna read them real quick and just put them all together, maybe if you can, Alex. But one, they're wondering why are we getting these insurance questionnaires now? I've never had them in my entire history of doing business. Then there's, okay, in there, what are the top things that I need to prioritize to reduce cost? And then there's, could I really get denied coverage if I answer no to some of these things? So those are some questions that are rolling in.
Okay, so let's talk about why you're filling them out first. Insurance, again, as much as it can be a pain in the buns, has taken the lead in the United States and really globally in forcing the hand of organizations to improve their cybersecurity protocols. So what I mean by that is unless the government issues new requirements and regulations that says you need to do all these things, insurance has done that by saying, hey, we won't offer you insurance unless you do this. Think of it as you now build a brand new house, you are now required to have it sprinklered in order to get insurance on it, right? So it's the same idea. You got to sprinkler your network with various security protocols so that you are a legitimate So you have a legitimate cybersecurity posture that they believe that therefore they are willing to offer insurance for you. So these things are very technical in nature. They're designed that way on purpose, that you as a CEO or CFO can't answer them yourself, because they don't want you under the veil of ignorance. They want you to actually include your IT person in that conversation and help fill out those applications. Things that are most important, it's actually what we've talked about today, multi-factor authentication. That tends to be what I would call a do not pass go, do not collect $200 type of security measure. Now, Cohen's first story actually pointed out that it is not the end all be all. However, many of the incidents that have happened historically could have been prevented with MFA in place, and often it was not in place. So it is a very effective tool, but it is not a panacea. You cannot rely on that solely by itself. So that's a security controller I would say is probably most important. You also want to make sure you have really sound backups, so that if you are unable to recover your system that's live, that you've got a backup strategy that you can pull from. You want that completely segregated so that if the bad guys get in, they're not also getting your backups and completely hamstringing you. Your last question was, will they really deny coverage?
Yes.
That the unfortunate reality is yes. They are pulling your application at time of incident and saying, okay, was everything in here answered correctly? And there's some wiggle room, right? So what I mean by that is, if every single time you're doing X and that's what you say in the application, and then the one time you didn't do it, that's human error, and insurance should still respond to that. But if you said we're doing X and 99 out of 100 times you're not, that's a material misstatement in an application, and they will use that to deny a claim. So if you read a cyber policy, all of them will speculate at some point in the policy that your application is considered part of the policy, and anything that's material misstated will be held against you. What you can do to get around that, because the questions are not very well worded, and I know you're going to be working with your IT partners that are on this call, is don't be shy to over articulate. Just because the question says it as a yes, no, doesn't mean you can't add sentences as a supplemental to the application to clarify what you mean and what you have and what your intentions are. It's also okay to brag. If there's something that's not asked about on an application and you want to talk about it, you're overall trying to paint a picture to an underwriter of why you are a better cyber risk than the company next door if you want better prices, terms, and conditions than the company next door.
Great point.
So don't be shy to brag. If you've got things on the horizon, hey, in the next 12 months, we're planning to do these 6 things, list them out and talk about it. You're making that underwriter feel more comfortable that you're actually taking cybersecurity seriously.
Awesome. Hey, Spencer, I might have one for you here. They're talking about they are part of an LLC, and ultimately they were told by their parent company that since the parent company had cyber insurance, that covers all the sub companies down the chain. And if I'm getting this, I'm summarizing because it was a long question. If I'm getting it wrong, I will be sharing these questions with all the panelists here. So we'll be able to get those answers if there needs to be further elaboration. But ultimately, Spencer, if you're a sub company, and you can term that how you want, are you covered by the parent, or should you really be making sure you've got your own protection as well?
I've got some thoughts on it, Spencer, too.
Yeah,
So
I was going to say, maybe Alex should jump in first.
Okay.
Okay. So generally speaking, most cyber policies are going to be written that in a way that incorporates subsidiaries that are majority owned, meaning 50% or more. So the advice this individual got was, hey, we don't need a separate policy because we're covered by the parent. That could very well be the case. You want to understand the ownership structure to ensure that. I would ask to have evidence that shows you are specifically named on that policy. An insurance carrier can add an endorsement that specifically names you as a subsidiary to say you are intended to be included. And then that's going to absolve of any question at time of claim. You are named on that policy. But there's also exceptions to that rule. If your parent company is a foreign organization, they might be buying a cyber insurance policy that isn't catered and designed to the laws and practices here in the United States. And therefore, at time of incident, you might also be beholden to use forensics firms and legal firms that are not in the United States because you're using this foreign insurance carriers panel of providers. So in those situations, you may actually still want to have a separate policy that represents you here for your operations. I hope that helps answer the question, Spencer. Feel free to add anything.
That's great, Spencer.
The other part, I would just make sure that there would be no conflict between you as a subsidiary or an affiliate and the parent, right? That's the first thing I would ask if you came to me with an incident and you had the parent leaning in as well. Usually, and then we'd want a joint defense agreement if there's not, but sometimes you do get conflict. Usually though, if you're a subsidiary, well, it depends. I mean, if they have the majority stake, much less concerned. If they have the minority stake, then I get more concerned over that portion. But I think you're right. I mean, I would make sure that you get a good broker to look into that, because Alex raised a lot of points. I don't think it ever hurts to have a separate policy, right, as coverage for yourself. But, if you can get that valid coverage, but I would just go through the process to make sure, rather than just assuming that they have you covered, that you're making sure that you're actually doing the due diligence to have that coverage there for you.
I've got two more questions. They're technical, and I'll answer them really quickly. One is saying, hey, on these cyber insurance questionnaires, I'm getting this RDP question. What is RDP? RDP is the remote desktop protocol. Ultimately, it means remote access to your network. Someone working from home, and they have access to resources. Does a vendor, and Target is a perfect example. Vendor had external access into the network, and that was one of the reasons why they ultimately got compromised. But anything where someone has remote access to your network ultimately is the spirit of that particular question. And your MSP should be able to answer that for you to make sure that you're protected. Our goal is you don't want anyone to have remote access to your network. And then when you do, you've got two-factor authentication enabled, and you're working with your managed service provider, one of the companies hopefully on this webinar that can really help you make sure that you secure that access, because that is a backdoor to your network. And that's why it's on the questionnaire, because that is a high profile compromise that happens too often than not. The other one is, how does a bad actor get into my company's employee email without a password? Well, there's techniques like brute force attacks that you can do, but ultimately they get in with a password. So imagine when LinkedIn or Target or whoever gets hacked and they get all these email addresses and passwords. And you might be thinking, well, that's no problem. I'll just go into Target and I'll change my password, or my employees will just change their password. Problem is they're using the same password across multiple online logins. And that's what they're hoping, because they take that information they got from Target, all those username and passwords, they put it into a piece of software, and that software goes to Chase, goes to Intuit, goes to Citibank, goes to Microsoft, goes to Amazon, goes to all these online portals looking for, did someone reuse their username and password? So I'd highly recommend talking to your MSP that you have, your managed service provider, your IT support company, and seeing if they have a password manager that they could actually recommend to you that would allow you to have a unique username and password for every online portal that's out there. And that's a whole nother webinar that we could do on.
Just real quick on that, Cohen, though, another
Yeah.
perfect example of how that can happen. I get it all the time. We're a Microsoft Office shop. I get emails that look like it's Microsoft Office that say, oh, your password's expiring, enter it here. So I give it to the bad guy. I now entered my password in something, so I know I'm actively putting my password. I get the MFA prompt and I go, yeah, no, that's me. I meant to do that because I just gave my password. And that's how they get around the MFA. So they completely, that's called phishing, right? They phish you entirely. And then that's where, again, it's people in process. You got to try to make sure that you're questioning these things and the authenticity.
I'm glad you brought that up, because in the poll, phishing was on the lower side of
I saw that.
cyber threat people were worried about. But I want to encourage everyone to understand, phishing is how they get to the ransomware, how they get to the other compromises 9 times out of 10. Again, it's that business email compromise. It's not just about they got access to someone's email. It's also about the emails that come into an end user's inbox, one of your staff's inbox, and what are they clicking on? What are they getting tricked by? And when they do click on it, what information are they putting in? Could be bank account, username, and password, because they think they're logging into Chase, but they're not actually logging into Chase. So that's where email is such a big deal here. I got one more question, and then I'll close us up and I'll let everyone get on about their day. The last question is, does the insurance company care if we have access to our vendors or our customers' network to provide remote assistance? And should that be disclosed on the insurance app somewhere?
So if you have access to somebody else's network, ideally they should be putting protections in place to make sure your access to their network is secure. Just the same way that if you're giving access to anyone's to anyone to your network, you should be making it secure. So the way it's asked on the application is it's all focused on your network security. Now, you bring up a good point. What could you compromise of somebody else's network, which really picks up that third-party liability component. But it's unfortunately not typically explored very detailed on these types of applications. They're really more concerned with, because they're insuring you, what's going to happen to your network. What do you have in place in protections for you?
Awesome. All right, I'm going to share my screen again really quick and wrap things up. Couple things. One, our next webinar that we're going to be talking about, and everyone on this webinar is going to get an email link to it, is going to be about a particular technology that's out there that really tries to identify business email compromises. And it's a MDR, we call it in the industry, Managed Detection and Response. Highly, highly recommend that you attend that webinar, because again, it's the next threat that's there. It's the new thing. And now MSPs, like all of us that sponsored this call, the PTGs, Darts, Affinities, Metros, LNS, and Sundog, we're implementing these tools in order to further protect our clients. So you really should attend that one. You're going to be hearing from all of us about it as well. But ultimately, it's going to be a great education on how you can protect your organization from a next level threat. So I want to call out Alex and Spencer for being on this call. This was great information. And so you all know, Alex is always willing, if you want to send her your cybersecurity insurance policy, she, depending on your organization, would be happy to review it, maybe show you some gaps that you might have. She also could refer you to someone maybe specific in your industry in case they don't cover it. But you got to realize this is a go-giver mentality that we have on this webinar. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to educate, we're trying to inform, and ultimately, if we do that, we're going to protect you. So you have resources on this call in the form of Alex from an insurance perspective. And then Spencer, if you had a legal question, he may not be able to answer it because he does a lot of the post-event stuff, which hopefully none of you need him for that. But if you do, that's your guy. But he might be able to refer you to, hey, here's a great firm out there that specializes in X, Y, or Z. So realize we are here to help. Everyone, Spencer, Alex, myself, and all the companies that put on this webinar to make sure that we can protect you. So every morning you come in, you wiggle that mouse, everything works, and you produce your widgets, you bill your hours, or whatever it is in your industry that you do, you can do it very effectively and consistently day in and day out. So Alex and Spencer, thank you so much for taking the time to come out and talk to all of our clients and everyone else that was on this call. I think it was incredibly informative for me, so I'm assuming it was definitely informative for everyone else. So any closing remarks, Alex or Spencer, or we good?
My last closing remark would be, and it touches on something Spencer brought up earlier. There's a reason the insurance carriers only work with a select few providers from a legal standpoint, a forensic standpoint. These are the folks that know what they're doing and know how to do it best. And that is one of the most valuable pieces you're going to get with a cyber insurance policy. And Spencer's done a lot of work with organizations who have not been insured. And I can't imagine any of them after the fact go, wow, I'm really glad I didn't have insurance for that. So really worthwhile to consider.
Yeah, and
Awesome.
I'll piggyback and just say, make sure when you're getting the insurance that you're working with people who know what they're doing. This is a specialized area. Your auto commercial brokers are great, but once again, you just really need to be thinking about the ins and outs and getting someone who specializes in it.
So we just put out a poll and it asked, I'm going to share it right now. I know more people are answering, but this is fascinating to me. That do you want a representative to reach out to you regarding any questions you may have around cyber insurance? I don't want anyone on this call to think in any way, shape, or form what we're trying to do is generate sales. This is literally information. And an overwhelming amount said no. And that's great. Maybe you have the most incredible insurance company in the world. You've got the greatest law firm. You are 100%, you feel protected. It never hurts to have a second set of eyes look at things. So you will get the contact information of Spencer and Alexandra. You'll get the contact information of all the companies that put on this particular webinar, their tools and resources to take advantage of, and I would highly recommend everyone take advantage of them. So with that, I will just say, again, thanks, Spencer and Alexandra. Thanks, everyone that attended this webinar. I hope it was incredibly informative. I'm sure we're going to be putting out some sort of a survey. Did you get what you were hoping out of this? Because, again, we want to make this an incredible well use of your time in the future. So thanks, everybody, and have a wonderful rest of your week.
Thank you.
Thanks.